The next objective, we're going to solve proportion equations using the cross multiplication. A proportion is a statement that two ratios are equal. One of the most convenient ways to solve problems involving ratio and proportion is to use the cross multiplication method. So for example, if A over B is equal to C over D, then the cross products of the proportion A times D and B times C are equal to each other. So notice here, if you just cross, you have A times B, A times D as in dog, and then B as in boy, B times C. Those are what we call proportions to one another. In this example, we're asked to solve the proportion. Recall, if you have a fraction on one side of an equation and a fraction on the other side, you can use cross multiplication to solve. It doesn't matter which side you decide to start with. I like to start with my variable side first. So here I'm going to multiply 9 times x, which is 9x, and that's going to be on the left side of my equation. Now the other side of the cross is going to be on the right side, and that is 63 times 5 is going to be on the right side. So remember, they're always going to be on different sides there. So that will leave me with 9x on the left side, and 63 times 5 is 315 on the right side. What's my next step to solving this equation? If you said divide by 9, that is correct. And recall, whatever you do to one side, you must also do to the other. And what will x equal? Do you have your calculator? You got it. If you said 35, that is correct. X equals 35, and there you have it. Application involving ratio and proportion. Let's apply the proportion to real-world problems. Jim earns $1,200 in 14 days. At this rate, how much would he earn in 30 days? So recall, when writing a ratio, the first number that is mentioned is your numerator. The second number that is mentioned is your denominator. So that's my first fraction, and that's going to be on the left side of the equation. The third number that is mentioned here is 30. So you have to decide with the third number whether it goes on top or bottom based on what you're comparing. So if we go back to the beginning, it's amount to days is what we're comparing. So since 30 is referring to days, since days is on the bottom, we would have to put the 30 on the bottom. And our unknown, what we don't know, is what the amount would be in 30. And so that would be x, our unknown. Again, amount is on top. We don't know how much the amount would be in 30 days, and that's what we want to find out. So once you have your equations set up, the next step then is to go ahead and proceed with the cross multiplication. So recall, it doesn't matter which side you start with. I always like to start with my variable side so that I can put it on the left, and then my number is going to be on the right. So I'm going to proceed with that same method. So 14 times x equals 14x, and that's going to be on the left side. Let's do our other cross, which is 1200 times 30. And 1200 times 30 is 36,000. So I'm going to have 14x on one side and 36,000 on the other. What's my next step to solving this equation? If you said divide by 14, that is correct. And whatever you do to one side, you do to the other. And x equals, yes, you got it, 2,571. That is how much she would earn in 30 days. Let's look at the next example. In 2 hours, Gianna can drive 130 miles. At this rate, how far will she have driven in 5 hours? So here, the first number that is mentioned is 2, and that refers to hours. That's on top. The second number that is mentioned is 130. That refers to miles. The third number that is mentioned is hours. You have to decide whether that goes on top or bottom based on what you're comparing. And since here hours is on top, that means that on the other side of the equation, the 5 has to go on top, which means your unknown would be on the bottom. Once you have your equation set up, your next step is to go ahead and proceed with cross multiplication. So starting with my variable side, I'm going to have 2 times x is 2x. And on the other side, I'm going to have 130 times 5, which is 650. What's my next step to solving this equation? That is correct. I need to divide by 2. Whatever you do to one side, you do to the other. And what will x be? If you said 325 miles, that is correct. And notice that my unknown, my value, was on the bottom, which is I didn't know, and that was miles. I wanted to know in 5 hours, how many miles will she have driven? And the answer again is 325 miles. There you have it.
In the diagram below, the triangle ABC and triangle DEF are similar. Similar figures have the same shape, but not necessarily the same size. In similar triangles, the corresponding angles are congruent, and the corresponding sides are said to be in proportion. So if angle A or triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF, then the following is true. And that is angle A would be congruent to angle D. Angle B is congruent to angle E. Angle C then would be congruent to angle F. Now with the sides are said to be in proportion. So when we talk about sides, in fact I've color coded it, this side of AB corresponds to the side DE on the big triangle. And on the little triangle, the side AC in blue here corresponds to the big triangle DF. And then also BC of the little triangle corresponds on the big triangle with side EF. So again, with similar triangles, the corresponding angles are congruent, which means that the corresponding sides are in proportion. So 8 to 12 and 10 to 15. These are all what we call corresponding sides, and then 12 to 18. And there you have it, similar triangles.
Here are similar triangles. Whenever you have similar geometric shapes and you are missing a side, you can use ratio and proportion to help you find the missing side. As long as you remember that you have to compare it with its corresponding side. So for example, this side here on the bottom of the big triangle, which side does it correspond with on the little triangle? So this is 20. So on the other one, what side will correspond to that? That's correct, the bottom here of this 8 meters. Okay, same thing if I go to the right side here. On the little triangle, the side that corresponds is this side. And on the little one, if I were to compare this side, on the big one, the side that corresponds to it would be this side. So you have to always remember to make sure you compare them to their corresponding sides. There are more than one way to set it up, but as long as you follow their corresponding sides, you'll always get it correct. Okay, you won't have any problems. All right, so here I'm going to just pick some sides here. So I did this side here, bottom 20. The corresponding side to that would be 8. So notice I put that on the bottom. And then 15 here. So the corresponding side to that would be the X that I'm looking for. Another way I could have also compared them, I could have done X over 8 on one side of the equation, and the side that corresponds to that would be on the other side, would be 15 to 20. And that would work. You'll get the same exact answer. The bottom line is, as long as your sides correspond to each other. So I'm going to go ahead and solve this. Cross multiplication. X times 20 equals 20x. And then 8 times 15 is 120. So I'm going to have 20x on one side and 120 on the other. Last step to solving this is to divide both sides by 20, and x equals 6. And here we're talking about meters, so the missing side was 6 meters. And there you have it, solving similar geometric shapes, or in this case, similar triangles, using cross multiplication. Rational equations using cross multiplication. We can also use cross multiplying to solve two rational equations. So again, that is always the case. You can use that method if you have one rational expression on one side and one on the other. It doesn't matter which side you start with in terms of crossing, as long as when you multiply one side, that goes on one side of the equation. When you go to the other cross, it goes on the other side. So I'm going to start here, 2 times x minus 1. That's going to be on one side. And 4 times x plus 5 is going to be on the other side. Next, I'm going to use the distributive property. I have to distribute the 2 times x, and then 2 times negative 1. I'm also going to distribute the 4 times x, and then 4 times 5. Next, I'm going to combine like terms, combine my x's with the x's and the regular numbers with the regular numbers. That's going to involve subtracting 4x from each side and then adding 2 to each side. Next, I'm going to divide by negative 2, and x equals negative 11. So there you have it. I've solved the ratio and proportion problem using cross multiplication, or what we call a rational equation using cross multiplication. And now it's time for one more checkpoint. A factory can produce 1,500 cans of juice in 3 hours. How many cans of juice can they produce in 8 hours? So notice here, in terms of setting up our equation, the first number that is mentioned is the 1,500. That's going to go on top. The second number that is mentioned is 3. That goes on bottom, and that's referring to hours. Third number that is mentioned is 8. 8 is referring to hours, and since hours is on the bottom, we must put the hours, 8 hours, under the bottom, and our unknown would be on top. Now that we have our equation set up, it's time to do the cross multiplication. That would be 3 times x is 3x, and then 1,500 times 8, which is 12,000. So we have 3x on one side and 12,000 on the other. What's my next step to solving this? Yes, that is correct. I must divide by 3, and whatever you do to one side, you do to the other, and x equals, you got it, 4,000, which is choice B. There you have it, proportion.